Hello, everybody. What an amazing presentation, and then that a rich garden. It wouldn't happen if there was no water, right? So I will be talking here about water and what we can do to help with the water issues. All right, it's working now. So maybe I will start with saying that approach to water and water scarcity all over the world is a little bit different because we all live in different parts that have different issues with the water. In some areas, you have a long drought season and the rain. In some other areas, the rain goes all the way around. And the scarcity of water is not as significant. I was fortunate in my life that I lived in 3 different continents. I grew up in Poland, where basically it was raining all year round. Then I moved to Canada, and I was living at the beginning in Toronto, that is at the edge of a huge lake with fresh water, and the city was supplied by the water from the lake. Then I moved to Vancouver, and Vancouver also has an amazing environment around, lots of lake, has a very tasty, good water available, and that water was not a problem. The issue is that when the population of the city grows and the water becomes more needed, that's where the problem starts. Here in Turkey, for example, the water scarcity has been historically an issue, so the culture grew around protecting water, and the sustainability of water was here taken care of way before the word sustainable became popular in the 21st century. So the problem is that we all live in the cities. By the year 2050, nearly 70% of population will be living in the city. Some people even say that by the end of 21st century, about 80% of population will be living in the cities. It creates a problem because when you live in a city, the water is always there. You open the tap, and one day it may not be there. There is a convenience the comfort creates a convenience. We abuse water simply because it's easy to do it. Theoretically, on average, a person uses around 170 liters of water per day. That's worldwide. In some places it's much more, some other places it's less, but that's the average number. However, the domestic use of water is only a small fraction. Industry and agriculture is using significantly more. And when it comes to, let's go back. Okay. For example, to use 1 kilogram of apples, you need about 700 liters of water, and produce 1 kilogram of meat takes 15,000 liters of water. Similar things applies when it comes to producing shirts, cars, cell phone. If you want to produce a cell phone, it takes about 13,000 liters of water. To produce a shirt, it's about 7,000 liters of water. To produce a car, it takes 150,000 liters of water. And the problem is that the developing countries are using much more water. The increase of withdrawal of water is growing, and developed countries are a little bit more controlling that. The issue is with the water that theoretically we have a lot. So the estimate is that we have way over 1 billion cubic kilometers of water. However, 97% of that is a salt water, and desalination of that is a very energy-consuming process. Only about 2.5% of the water is a fresh water. And out of that water, only about 0.3% of the fresh water is on the surface. The rest of that water is either locked in the glaciers or in Arctic and Antarctic, or underground in aquifers. And what we do with our water, quite often we simply abuse it. So there is a wastage of water and there is a lot of pollution. And we cannot survive without the water. So basically, for example, in the city of Johannesburg, where I work and live, there is official number of people is about 6.5, unofficial is about 10 million people. However, the water is transported over 500 kilometers from a place in the Lesotho. And that water, the city of Johannesburg does not really have any natural water. There is no big river, there is no big lakes. So all the water has to be transported from far, far away. Lots of people think, okay, I'm going to use a borehole. That's a trap, because the biggest problem with the boreholes is that as much as it's easy to draw the water, to replenish that water in the borehole takes a tremendous amount of time. So a shallow wells can take days or months or years. But if you're going to withdraw water from about 100 meters down, replenishing that water takes sometimes hundreds of years. And if you go even further, it takes thousands of years. So if we draw that water too fast, in the next 50 to 100 years, there will be no water in aquifers. And what do we do then? So this is not a sustainable approach. We can't do that. Or if we do that, we have to actually really think about how to put the water back to the aquifers. And what is happening today is that drawing water, this is kind of example showing that if there's too many boreholes, the water table just goes down. And eventually we may get to this problem where simply there is no water. This diagram shows how much water is withdrawn at different continents and how much water is actually used. So you can see that that gap here or here, that's how much water that is drawn and wasted. And in many places in the world, people can rely only on the boreholes and wells because they don't have anything else. And we were talking about it, this is an article from 1990 saying that in 17 years, the city of Cape Town is going to run out of water. It actually did a few years ago, and there was a major crisis. But we need to do something about it. Luckily, we have rain, and this is our savior. Now, we all know the cycle of rain, and what happens is that when the rain falls down, we very promptly remove it from our hard surfaces, put it in the underground systems, and put it in the channels, and create quite often a havoc in the rivers when the erosion creates a tremendous damage. Our cities are paved, and this creates a problem. Luckily, well, not luckily, there is also on top of that, there is a climate change challenge. So you have either drought or you have rains that are too intense. And when the soil is dry, when it's after a drought, it's not absorbing the water, and the water runs on the surface, creating another layer of problems. So we have two main problems with the water in the city. One is that there is not enough of it, and the one that there is too much of it. Now, I very strongly believe that we have to find a solution, even if the politicians are not helping us as much as they could, and the policies are not there. Landscape architects are in a very good position because we understand the systems, we understand the nature, and we can basically work with nature to find a solution. And even though it's not going to solve the problem 100%, it's at least going in the right direction. So the complex problem requires a really good solution. We have to deal very wisely with the stormwater management. So this is basically where my presentation comes from. That was the introduction to it. Now, urban parks allow us to actually deal with stormwater management in a very practical way that will help us to deal with the stormwater management. We can either try to keep the water, and then we can use it, either harvest it or infiltrate water into the ground, and also, we can slow down the flow of water to make less problem with the runoff. So we can capture, we can clean, and we can retain or detain stormwater runoff. Why in urban parks? Urban parks have a large area and allow for relatively easy intervention. Well, you can read it here. It's very easy to manage. The cost of installation is relatively inexpensive, and that's a good place where we can do that. There is also a lot of additional benefits. It supports wildlife, biodiversity through wetlands. It's attractive to people, allows for recreation, cools environment, and so on and so forth. What we can do inverted drainage infiltration. We can do water features that will monitor the quality of stored water and allow for maintenance. And we can also reuse collected water. We should use nature-based solutions. So infiltration wells, rain gardens, wetlands, retention, detention ponds, and biofiltration are basically the techniques that we can use in order to deal with the stormwater. Now, whenever you're doing any design, you have to answer three questions: what you're doing, why you're doing that, and then the most important is how you're going to do that. So we already discussed that what the problem is. We know what's the problem. We know what to do. Now let's talk about how we're going to do that. So I'll give you here a few examples of relatively easy solutions that I managed to implement without looking for big policies, without looking for backing from the government. It's just, as a landscape architect, we can do certain things that will help the problem. So this is a project in Sport Park in South-Aldegrove in British Columbia. It started in 2002, and basically this area was to be developed, and that was the area of the park. And right here was the area of the formerly existing wetland that dried out and was basically gone. So what we did in this area here, we basically did a biofiltration, collected water from the sport fields, did a biofiltration, then followed by the small detention pond, and then we fed it into reconstructed wetland. And over the years, a few years later, the area looked like this. So this is the area where is the detention pond. This is the area where the wetland is. And just because at the lower area here, there is a community and houses, we had to protect them from potential flooding. So we put an overflow that only in the major rain events takes water away. Otherwise, basically all of the water goes into the wetland. And you can see that, this area basically flourished quite well. Now, practically how it was done, the intervention that we did was very cost effective. Basically, what we did, our drainage for the playfield, we dug the trenches a little bit deeper and filled them up with gravel. And then the perforated pipe that is responsible to collect the water was put upside down with the openings at the top. So all the water that was getting into the trench during the normal rain events, nothing major, it will basically infiltrate into the ground. and only during the main rain events, the water will go and be taken away. Similar thing applied to the French drains when they are simply deeper and the collection pipe is just upper. And again, the infiltration, the perforation in the pipe is on the top, not at the bottom. We also did our infiltration sumps and infiltration wells that whenever we had a chance to put water into the ground, it went into the ground. The detention pond also slows down the flow and at the same time allows for water to go into the ground. And over the years, this is what the area looks like now. And if you can compare the wetland that was here and was basically ceased to exist, at this point it's very nicely flourishing and is quite successful. And this is eventually what the park looks like today. Now, what's very critical that before you do that kind of intervention, you have to really look at the soils. The most important thing are the geotechnical survey and hydrological survey. What you need to know is what's below. Because, for example, if you happen to have clay layers underneath, the water won't infiltrate. So you have to be aware of it. And also you have to know what kind of hydrological conditions you have in the area. Because, if you don't do it right, you may create a landslide somewhere else. Because when the water gets into the ground, it travels and it can create problems. So these two surveys are extremely important to make sure that whatever you're doing is not going to have a negative side effect. This is another project, and actually this one had quite a bit of clay underneath. The layer of clay was about 2 meters below, so we couldn't really infiltrate water deep into the ground, but we still could put water into the just surface groundwater. So this project, when the city was growing, they wanted to have, there was an existing river that had a fish habitat in it, and the city wanted to build in this area a transfer station when there will be a lot of cars coming in and parking, and they'll hop on a bus and go to the city. This is what it looks right now. And the design basically included a large paved area and included a detention pond, a biofiltration, and what was happening is that the water was collected in the parking. Then from the parking, it traveled into detention pond, and from detention pond, it went to the biofiltration. The rain gardens that we did in the parking had their catchment raised slightly, so the water again will go into the ground, and only in the main rain events is going to go into the catch basin and be taken away. So you can see that kind of how it works. And then water went to the detention pond, and from detention pond it went to the biofiltration, and from biofiltration it went to the river. This is another project, also in Canada. It was an industrial area that was 100% paved and industrial, and it got transferred into a residential multifamily buildings. And the water that was collected from the buildings, we had green roofs, of course, and all kind of new initiatives, but we went a step further. The water that was collected from the roofs was eventually put into biofiltration systems, and from there it went again to a small river that was going by. The water that was collected from the sidewalks and walkways was also collected into this and went into, this is shortly after installation. The project was quite successful. Interesting thing was that we wanted to create a big biodiversity in this area. So through selection of plants and selection of intervention, we actually, this is picture taken about 3 years after installation. It was quite successful. There is a funny anecdote related to that. I noticed at one point that some kind of vandal came and just started cutting down the trees. And I was like, why? Why would somebody do that? This kind of doesn't make sense. You know, like it looks like it chopped with machete or something. And we're like, who is doing that? We found out that this guy was doing that. So our invitation to wildlife was too successful because we invited a family of beavers that basically settled there. And then we had to find a way, you know, how we're going to deal with that. So we encouraged people to walk the dogs. And eventually beaver moved out because they were doing quite a bit of damage. Here is another project where, again, that was an industrial area, and it was adjacent to estuary, to basically, that's at the end of the inlet, and estuary had it was a very sensitive environmentally area. So this is what happened over time. Originally, there was no creek here, but we wanted to collect all the water from this area and put it through biofiltration and allow it to go into estuary, but you had to make sure that the water is clean. So this is what the project kind of looked. And eventually, this is what we designed. So there is that creek with a series of pools that also allow water to infiltrate into the ground, clean it up, and by the time it went into the estuary, it was already clean and safe. This is a project from Africa where I practice now, and in this community, it's a dam, and the water, the runoff from the community was collected and basically was running through these two channels, but there was a lot of trash in it, there was a lot of things that we didn't want to go into the lake. So what we did, we made an intervention and basically changed the existing channel that was just a concrete runoff. We put a sort of a trash catchment area, and then we did the biofiltration process, so the water that goes into the lake is quite a bit cleaned. So, natural process that clean water, there is a mechanical, biological, and aeration. When it comes to mechanical, it's very simple, it's just gravel. So, and if also formation of gravel, small or big gravel, it just collects the stuff. When it comes to biological process, we can do what we do for natural swimming ponds when basically we have to remove the nutrients because nutrients are causing a lot of algae problem. And biofiltration also can be done in many other forms where basically the water that runs to the plants absorb all stuff that is dissolved in the water. There's a few examples of that. They're all from Africa now. And when it comes to aeration, well, nature does aeration, and we can do that too. So there's many ways we can do it. Now, talking about the aeration, about the spray parks, there is a certain challenge that when it comes to spray parks. They are very cool and attractive, and they provide a lot of benefits. But when you are designing spray parks, you have to really consider there's 4 difficulties there. One is water containment. Where is the water held, right? Then there is a lot of splash. So we have to try to contain that splash, make sure that the water is not really removed. There is increased evaporation, and another problem is water sanitation. Even though this area is not really intended for intense play by the kids, but because they do play there, and because people interact with water, we have to make sure that the water is safe, that if any kid will drink that water, it's not going to get sick. So typically, a project like that requires a complex design, and quite often it requires a similar level of sanitation that is done for swimming pools with chlorine and all kind of elements like that. But there's a better way to do it. What you can do, you can repurpose water, so you can use fresh water for the park when you know it's a potable water and good, and then that water after use is collected and used for irrigation. So you basically repurpose the water and you can avoid an expensive and complex sanitation process. Well, this technique and many other techniques I am describing in the book I wrote. This is predominantly about water features, but also has a lot of initiatives about stormwater management, about rainwater harvesting, and all the initiatives that I mentioned here. We also have a permeable paving, but permeable paving, my personal opinion is that the permeable asphalt and permeable concrete are still require quite a bit of thoughts to it. The problem with these two products is that they work perfect for about 3 to 5 years, and then dust plugs them up. And there is no way to clean it up, so eventually they become a solid surface that don't allow water to infiltrate, unless we can find a way to backwash it and clean it up, which is very difficult. So I think they still have to work on that technology. But there's many other technologies that allow you to infiltrate water through paving. There is also a lot of benefits of water conservation. With cooling and purifying, it's a passive and active recreation. My personal thing is that we can quite often design things for people, but we quite often forget about animals. And supporting wildlife, making sure that they are safe, is critical. Now, let's talk about the implementation, how we can do that. So there's basically 4 stages. You have to do a proper site analysis. You have to do a certain level of modeling. You have to consider materials. And of course, you have to consider maintenance. So I created a kind of a quick checklist for each of these stages. Oops. One. Sorry for that. There you go. So with site analysis, as I said earlier, you have to do definitely a geotechnical survey, and you have to do the hydrological survey. But you have to also figure out how you're going to use the collected water. What's the local need? You have to consider all the climatic patterns, topography, how steep is the site, geology, soil composition, type of vegetation you're going to use this area, and on and on. So basically, there is a number of elements that you have to do in the site analysis. The next stage will be a site modeling checklist. So once you know how much water you can collect and what are your conditions, you have to pretty much model it and figure out in calculations how the nature is going to deal with that water. The next stage is material selection. So you have to make sure that the materials are properly selected for your project, that you have to make sure that the products are not shipped from very far away, because that's another issue. Anyway, there is a list of things that needs to be considered. And then the last thing is the maintenance, the checklist. So before the project is handed over, you have to prepare a proper manual on how to take care and how to maintain the intervention. That will be it.